delicious fruits and vegetables, bright flowers, plants that enhance our landscapes. Fields of golden grain, grains that feed our world. Dense old-growth forests and more. Our world exists because of plants that photosynthesize and produce oxygen for us to breathe, and plants that clean our air of impurities. Essential in this process is pollination. Pollination is defined as the transfer of pollen grains from the male parts of a plant to the female parts of a plant, resulting in fertilization and the production of seeds. Pollination is made possible by insects, birds, and even mammals, such as this bat, and environmental conditions, such as wind and water. Seeds are then spread and scattered to germinate and begin the process again. There are two primary types of pollination, abiotic and biotic. Abiotic pollination refers to pollination that is not mediated by animals, such as wind and water. Pollination by wind, or anemophily, is an essential part of the pollination process of field crops, such as corn. If pollination fails, ears of corn do not fill out completely. This ear of corn had healthy pollination. Water pollination, or hydrophily, is specific to angiosperms, which simply means flowering plants. We all know that bees are the power lifters of the pollinator world, but let's not forget our incidental pollinators, the birds and the bats. While hummingbirds are the most notable bird pollinators, there are 2,000 other bird species around the world that feed on nectar, or insects and spiders that reside within nectar-bearing flowers. Bats, although not really known to pollinate in great quantities, are known to carry pollen grains very long distances. They are nectar-feeding bats that are attracted to flowers that open at night. These flowers are usually large in size, are pale in color, and have flowers that are very fragrant and copious amounts of liquid nectar that draw the bats in to feed. In feeding, they accidentally carry pollen from plant to plant, inadvertently fertilizing important fruit crops such as mangoes, bananas, guavas, and agave. Pollinators that are most familiar and among the most efficient are insect pollinators. But a pollinator is simply an animal that moves pollen from the male anther or stamen of a flower to the female stigma of a flower. This bumblebee is loaded down with pollen, and it's ready to return to the nest. He uses combs and brushes on each hind leg to gather pollen. The pollen is then stored in the corbicula, or pollen basket, until the bee returns to the nest. Many native bees make their home in the ground, where the queen lays her eggs and workers care for the larvae as they hatch. Bees, wasps, butterflies, moths, and beetles all have complete metamorphosis with 4 stages of development: the egg, the larva, the pupa, and the adult, which is typically a winged stage and the only stage that can reproduce. There are unique pollinators in plants that are specialized, and they're dependent on each other for pollination to be successful. One of the best examples of this specialization is the fig. There is a tiny wasp called Ceratosolin capensis. One or more of this wasp climbs into the fruit of the fig to reach the flower, which is found inside the fruit. Once fertilization takes place, the wasp dies and is consumed by enzymes within the fig, turning the wasp into a protein. Another example is the yucca, which is fertilized by the yucca moth with its elongated body and long proboscis. It's a perfect fit for the beautiful yucca flower. Bees are revered as the masters of pollination. There are colonies of honeybees established all over the country by homeowners, farmers, ranchers, and hobbyists. These bees are not native bees and are very social, living in established colonies with one queen, workers, and drones. There's great interest in keeping and maintaining bees so that valuable crops and sustainable gardens can be pollinated sufficiently to produce crops. European honeybees live in a highly organized caste system where each type of individual has a specific function. Workers gather pollen and nectar to feed the larvae. Drones mate with unmated females, one of which will leave and become a queen. There cannot be 2 queens in a colony. This is a very simplistic description for a very complex insect community. European honeybees swarm in the spring and early summer. A young queen will emerge, taking 12 to 15 drones with her, leaving to establish a new colony. Seeing a swarm of bees in proximity to people and pets can be alarming, but the swarm will typically move along, focused on its mission. Native bees were in the United States long before European travelers brought honeybees to this country. It is estimated that there are 4,000 native bee species in America. Most native bees are solitary, stingless individuals that make their nests in the ground. Protecting these native pollinators is critical for their survival. Many populations are already at risk. Consider this. A recent study by the Royal Society Bee Biological Sciences states that crop production and yields for critical high-nutrient crops is not what it could be if the populations of honeybees and native bees were given a boost. But their study also gives evidence that certain populations of both are in decline. It is suggested that by adopting practices that provide areas of nutrition, shelter, and other natural habitat needs, bee populations could be enhanced. Encouraging additional participation in honeybee management programs could also be of benefit to commercial growers of affected crops such as apples, watermelons, almonds, pumpkins, and blueberries. And in doing so would also help home gardeners and those who live on sustainable farmlands. Another school of thought is that both native bees and honeybees are being impacted by the use of certain chemicals, both in the home garden and in large farming operations. The fact is, the surveying of native bees in the United States is in its early years, whereas European entomologists have been surveying bee populations for hundreds of years. Our native bee populations need to be monitored and surveyed before determining scientifically if they are in trouble and why they are in trouble. And our entomologists in the United States are doing just that. For those who enjoy nature and wish to preserve and conserve critical aspects of our natural world, such as bees, they can use a technique called Integrated Pest Management, or IPM. IPM is a pest management system using a combination of methods for control of pest problems. When used properly, IPM reduces chemical costs, helps stop development of pesticide resistance, limits exposure to pesticides for people and wildlife, and helps the environment. There can be balance between finding success in our agricultural environment and protecting wildlife. You can find information on IPM on your local cooperative extension system website. The thing is, if you feel you must use a pesticide, research the one that is applicable to your situation and follow all directions on the label. Always. So now that we've learned how important pollinators are to our environment, our well-being, our existence, you might be wondering how to attract more pollinators to your home, garden, landscape, or agribusiness. Well, it's all about science. Pollinators in general need shelter. They need a secure location to deposit their eggs. They need pollen plants, and native plants provide that. Plants like sassafras, cedar, oaks, native grasses. You provide shelter and a food source for hungry caterpillars. Groupings of native trees and shrubs, grasses, perennials, annuals, herbs, they all provide a balance of plant materials for eager pollinators. Cultural requirements will differ from region to region, but check with your local nursery professional to find a selection of plant materials for your area. You can also go to pollinator.org/guides to request more information. Don't forget to include a water source and an area for mudding so that butterflies and other insects can get minerals that they need. Learn about deadheading annuals to keep them blooming all summer, but don't forget to allow seed heads to remain at the end of the season. Your pollinators worked hard to create those seeds. Save them for next year's garden. Last, keep your camera handy so that you can keep a record of the beautiful pollinators visiting and working in your garden. Now, enjoy a few of my favorite pollinators and pollen plants, and I thank you so much for listening today.
Time to go in, Saber.